War has returned to Europe as a hot war in Ukraine, but also as a so-called hybrid war aimed, above all, at NATO countries supporting Ukraine, countries like Germany. Just last week, Munich Airport was brought to a standstill on 2 separate days. The reason? Drones allegedly controlled by Russian criminals. And it doesn't stop there. Cyber intrusions targeting critical infrastructure, government agencies, and businesses have almost become routine. In Germany alone, more than 1,000 are recorded every week. Time and time again, experts point to autocracies like Russia, China, and Iran. On To The Point, we ask: drones, cyber attacks, sabotage. Is Europe ready for a hybrid war? Welcome to this week's To The Point. I'm Javier Arguedas. It's good to have you with us. Let's meet today's guests. Wilhelmine Stenglin is a security and defense policy editor at Table Briefings here in Berlin. Johann Schmid is a colonel in the German Armed Forces and an expert on hybrid warfare at the Bundeswehr Center for Military History and Social Sciences. And Jannik Hartmann is a junior non-resident associate fellow at the NATO Defense College. His research focuses on hybrid threats to critical infrastructure and military mobility. To all of you, welcome. Thank you for being with us today. Johann, I'd like to start with you. Europe is expressing deep concern about these drone sightings, cyber attacks, and sabotage cases in critical infrastructure. They seem to be independent, isolated incidents, but some experts recognize a pattern there. Do you see that too?
There are certainly patterns behind that, and drone operations attacks, they fit perfectly into, let's say, the main approach of hybrid warfare, operating in various gray zones between war and peace, friend and foe, internal, external security, civil and military fields of responsibility. So it's easy to use these tools to create ambiguity and plausible deniability. And for this reason, I would expect that this is just a starting point.
However, these types of attacks, Wilhelmine, have been here and have been going on for years. Why do you think they are making the headlines now, these days, if they're happening around so long?
Yeah, as you said, it's nothing new that we see hybrid operations, hybrid activities in Europe. But in recent weeks and months, there has been a ramp up of frequency. And the drones, I think, is something that's also very visible to citizens, which makes it ever more visible to the society. So I think there's a ramp up in the frequency and kind of escalation. And we actually see and feel it more.
Jannik, in one of your articles, you've said that these types of attacks could have broader targets apart from just energy infrastructure, transport infrastructure, and defense infrastructure. What are we dealing with here then?
Very much so, Javier. I mean, what we have been seeing in the news lately are predominantly area incursions. When you think of last year, it was predominantly maritime infrastructure that is targeted, but the picture of hybrid warfare spans way beyond that. I mean, as mentioned, maritime cables, pipelines have been a frequent target of these operations in the past year, but we are also seeing attacks on transportation infrastructure, thinking of concrete military corridors, train lines that are very much important for sending military aid to Ukraine, but also the defense infrastructure itself, attacks on military bases, drones flying over them, but also defense companies, their production facilities, as well as their executives who are getting increasingly targeted.
We're seeing how broad this problem is. We're now going to focus on that challenge specifically. Many of these hybrid threats aren't really new, as we said. For a long time, they were downplayed or ignored. But now politicians seem to have realized they can no longer look away and that action is needed.
More and more drones. Recently, European airports in Oslo and Copenhagen had to be closed after major attacks on infrastructure in both cities. The likely instigator, Vladimir Putin. Here, he mocks the commotion. I won't do it anymore. I won't send any more drones to France, Denmark, Copenhagen, or Lisbon, or anywhere else they might fly. Sabotage, hybrid attacks, cyber attacks, and disinformation campaigns on the internet are on the rise. Experts estimate that there are more than 37,000 cyber attacks per day worldwide. Critical infrastructure is at risk. Hybrid attacks target energy facilities, water supplies, private and public companies, and governments.
Neue Allianzen
New alliances and autocracies are forming against us and attacking liberal democracy as a way of life.
als Lebensform
Our free way of life
Unsere
is under
freiheitliche
attack.
Lebensweise wird attackiert.
But classic espionage also continues to play a role within hybrid attacks. The employee of an AfD politician was recently sentenced to almost 5 years in prison because he spied for China. Hybrid attacks. How vulnerable are free democracies?
Let's try and break that down. Johann, Vladimir Putin has accused the West of being hysterical when pointing to the Kremlin behind some of these attacks. Is there any proof that Russia is indeed the culprit?
Well, many of the activities in the drone sphere, but also the attacks on the critical undersea infrastructure, for example, they fit into the picture of the Russian-Ukraine war and our Western support to Ukraine in their defense against Russia. So many of these activities. But regarding single events, it's always difficult to trace them back. Plausible deniability, drones, the perfect means of hiding behind these activities. But what we also have to notice is that now we are aware about the drone threat and we have to do something against that. But hybrid warfare is about like an iceberg, and you always see just the tip of the iceberg. Normally you don't see the iceberg as such, but hybrid warfare is much broader and the big elements are not visible. So, for example, when the fifth column of our hybrid adversaries are entering Europe via weaponized migration routes, we did not really focus on that, but they are at least as threatful as the threat by drones.
If there is, Jannik, an idea, a concept behind these attacks, a single one, if you will, what's the ultimate goal?
I mean, those incidents that we have been talking about, they follow a, so to say, overarching strategy and some instances very specific operational goals. But what combines all of them is, in principle, 3 sets of aspects. The first thing is that they are meant to test readiness and assertiveness. How fast is NATO in responding? How assertive will the response be? And is it perhaps accompanied by a change in policy? The second thing is that they are meant to sow division between members of the EU or NATO. We need to imagine that after every major incident, there is an internal debate over how we should respond. And some member states argue for a more assertive, some for a more defensive posture. And the third aspect is that these attacks aim to have a psychological effect, to create a feeling of uncertainty among the population that despite geographical distance, one can be targeted. And at the same time, this, of course, undermines the credibility in defensive institutions and alliances.
Do you think that is working, Wilhelmine, the psychological aspect of it, and also the assertiveness that we see when NATO reacts to these attacks?
Yeah, maybe to add to all these 3 points, I would say you can also look at who has an interest in the consequences of those things. And one of the goals here is also to distract from the actual front line, which is in Ukraine. And we can see now that the headlines in recent days have been all about drones in Germany and in other European countries, but they haven't been as much about Ukraine and what's happening there. And that is not because Russia hasn't attacked Ukraine in recent days, that's just because we have been distracted. And I think that's a very important point, which adds to what Jannik has already said. And when it comes to the psychological consequences, I think, yes, we can clearly see that society is worried about what's happening right now. And that also sparks into trust in governments. And that's very concerning.
We certainly have a feeling here that we're not at peace, as the German Chancellor said. Johann, you have claimed that one cannot separate classic warfare from hybrid warfare anymore. So if we're being attacked, would you expect European countries to, say, sabotage Russian infrastructure too?
Well, as you hint, hybrid actors are operating on purpose in grey zones. gray zones between classical categories of order and responsibility. For example, the big interface between war and peace, or between friend and foe, with the frenemy as a particular challenging element in between. Or thinking about the complex interface between internal and external security with many different players, state players, non-state players, military, civil. And of course, the interface between military and civil fields of responsibility, between state and non-state actors, between reality and truth and fiction and propaganda. And operating at these interfaces, this is the way how hybridity is created in the first place, in order to paralyze the situational awareness and decision-making processes in the heads of the respective victim or defender. So this is the methodology which is followed, and Russia is an actor behind that with a strong military footprint, but there are many other actors behind as well, state actors, non-state actors, and sometimes they are supporting each other as proxies.
But can the West respond to that with similar strategies? Is the West responding with similar strategies?
The West, Europe, and the single countries, because the most responsibility relies with the countries to protect their societies, their critical infrastructure, to strengthen their military. And what is necessary is a comprehensive hybrid defense or hybrid resilience building. Defending on the military frontier, of course, but also defending and preparing and making resilient our critical infrastructure and our society against the non-military hybrid attack vectors, weaponized migration, ideological radicalization, criminal activities, and the build-up of parallel societies which have no loyalty to the state in which they are living.
We're definitely going to take a look at what can be done to target these challenges. However, Jannik, I would like to dwell on the fact of the societal aspect of it, because misinformation and disinformation are a huge risk as well that we also have to tackle when we talk about hybrid warfare. It is the top risk, according to the World Economic Forum Global Risks Report 2025, topping even wars and climate change. What role does it play in the hybrid warfare, and are we ready to face that?
Well, disinformation campaigns are certainly one dimension, and we see huge influences that, for instance, have effects in election campaigns or in basically creating a feeling of distrust among the society, not knowing anymore what is real, what information can be trusted, and this is exactly where we need to increase resilience among members of our society. And this is very much critical. I mean, judging from other countries, for instance, the Nordics, the Baltics, their society appears to be much more ready to face threats, to face acts of aggression or acts of sabotage than we are. So this is something we very much need to improve.
Would it help, Wilhelmine, if societies work stronger or better in making these attacks visible, informing the public about what's going on? Because sometimes these attacks remain undisclosed to the public.
I think yes. I think informing and communicating about what's happening, not in a way of spreading fear, but in a way of communicating we are aware and we have control over things that are happening, we're seeing them, and raising awareness also what we can do against it. So I think it really starts by not only giving a speech, as Friedrich Merz did and said, but also sending people to schools, businesses, informing what are the threats that are there and what can be done against it. I think that's something that's really, really important.
What can be done against it? That's the big question. NATO already has ways to defend itself against drone flights, for example, but the effort often seems out of proportion to the actual incident. Stopping a single drone can require massive resources, while the threat itself may be small. That imbalance raises tough questions. How can NATO protect its members without exhausting its defenses?
Recently, NATO missiles costing tens of thousands of euros shot down cheap Russian drones over NATO territory in Poland. Drones will soon be rendered ineffective using much cheaper laser systems. The German Interior Minister wants to amend the Air Security Act. He's calling for a drone defense center and is developing partnerships. The aim is to ensure that drone defense technology is also developed more intensively in Europe, in cooperation with partners from Israel and Ukraine. These Israeli drone defense systems are a cost-effective way to shoot down aircrafts. The German Armed Forces already operates its own cyber and information domain space command to combat digital and hybrid attacks. Data exchange between intelligence services in NATO and the EU will also be improved. How could both bodies better defend themselves against the increasing threats posed by hybrid attacks?
We're going to try and take a look at possible solutions to all of this here. Jannik, Europe is considered weak when it comes to protecting its skies from drone attacks, for example. What deficiencies do you see, and what could pose a threat that makes the solution so difficult?
Mm-hmm. I mean, what we've been seeing in the video right now is a key element, which is creating resilience in various domains, not just the air domain. And to be frank, this is very much important, but there are two key aspects to this. And the first thing is that you cannot create resilience in every domain we are talking about, in every domain that is experiencing sabotage or hybrid warfare. Think of train lines, for example. Critical cables that run next to them are often kilometers long. You cannot simply build a fence around them. And the second aspect is that in those areas where you can increase resilience, Russia is likely to shift to a different strategy. So, for instance, last year we have seen predominantly attacks in the maritime domain, pipelines, cables, and in response, NATO launched a very successful mission, a Baltic Sentry. And we saw instances decrease, and now we have a spike in violations of airspaces and drone attacks. So what I think we really need to have, and I'm speaking from my personal opinion, not my institutional capacity, is that we need to raise the cost to Russia. And NATO, for instance, should signal clear red lines that they can enforce, and if violated, will lead to severe consequences. And we have seen good examples of this. For instance, Poland's defense minister 2 weeks ago said that no further incursions will be tolerated, and also none happened since. And I think this is a good example we should follow.
Johann, do you think Germany is also responding accurately and in the right way to these attacks? Because we don't see very much of an aggressive stance.
Well, we have, with the so-called Zeitenwende, we are moving in the right direction on the military field. It's a long way, but we are moving in the right direction. On other domains, protecting, for example, the society is largely unprotected against non-military hybrid attack vectors. So that's probably our biggest hybrid vulnerability. And the other point would be protecting our critical infrastructure against the threats you have shown on the screen just. There we started. Nobody would argue against this, but we are just starting. There are some good elements to see that the companies responsible for critical infrastructure are taking more responsibility. So that's a good step in the right direction.
Just to be clear, what does it mean practically speaking? Say a power plant. What do you have to do to protect it?
For all critical infrastructures, we have to focus on defense against drones. And not only because of Russia, because everybody, also non-state actors, individuals, can go into a shop, buy a drone. It's a bit questionable why it's allowed to buy drones and destroy, or let's say target, an airport. Not destroying the airport, but hampering the flights and so on. So this would be probably the single, from a technical standpoint, the single most important point regarding the protection of our critical infrastructure.
Maybe if I can add to that,
yes.
Because actually there's a law right now in the parliament that's to increase the physical safety of critical infrastructure. And the government has agreed on that a month ago, and it doesn't include anything on drones. And it was on the minister's table before that it should include some paragraphs on drones, but it wasn't included. And now we can see the interior minister acting on all these things, announcing defense center for against drones, stuff like that, but only after we've seen the headlines increasing. So I think this is one of the major problems that we have, that we are only reacting instead of proactively thinking about what can happen next and what should be done against it.
And there's another risk factor that I wanted to dwell on, because experts assume that many of our countries are already infiltrated with spies and other actors for other states that are already here. Is Germany, for example, aware of this danger, and is it reacting enough?
I think this is something that we have seen, and it's just another layer of the hybrid warfare we're seeing. It's the so-called single-use agents that are used by Russia to, again, increase insecurity among society, to spread the feeling that everyone could be a danger. And I think it's one of the problems that we need to tackle and that have not been tackled enough yet.
We also have to talk about cyber attacks. Jannik, they also seem to be performed quite easily. At least that's the impression many people have. What measures are in place and what is working to protect critical IT infrastructure?
Mm-hmm. I mean, to be frank, those instances that we have been seeing with cyber attacks, they can have profound consequences, as we have, for instance, been seeing at the Berlin airport last week. However, our digital infrastructure has also become more resilient over the past years, and we see these instances decrease, and more sophistication is needed to cause sufficient harm. And in that domain, at least in my opinion, we are more resilient than compared to other domains.
When it comes to misinformation and disinformation, Wilhelmine, the last few elections where Russia was accused of trying to interfere with electoral processes actually saw pro-Russian candidates lose. Is that a sign that measures and actions against misinformation are working?
I think we still have to see that it was close elections and that misinformation was spread, and that we see that some of the measurements worked. But it's nothing that we can. It's nothing that will not be a problem in future anymore. That we have solved this kind of problem. And I think, just adding on what Jannik just said on the cyber attacks, yes, we've increased resilience, but again, there's a law in Germany that is there to increase cyber resilience for economies, but also for the state, and it excludes some of the state infrastructure, which is actually a problem, because this is something that belongs to critical infrastructure, in my opinion. So there's still a lot to do on cyber resilience and on misinformation, both.
Do you think Germany is quick in reacting with legislation for all of these measures that are needed?
I think we're a democracy, and we have very complicated political situation again in Germany, even after the breakdown of the government before. And quick is not something that democracies usually are, and that really is something that is of concern, yes.
How liable are we because we are a liberal democracy, Jannik?
I mean, I very much agree with what Hermine said. I mean, tackling these problems just takes time. And the problem is that we are just confronted with a mass array of these challenges. And just looking across the Atlantic, we also are uncertain how secure the backing is that we have. For instance, if Poland would decide to shoot down one of Russia's fighter jets, there would be an internal debate over how secure US backing would be. And all these questions make concrete answers, and especially fast answers that are decided unilaterally, very, very difficult to achieve.
In that sense, Johann, what would you want your leaders to improve when it comes to tackling these challenges?
3 points. First of all, creating a multidimensional hybrid situational picture, including all relevant domains and dimensions, the military, but also the information sphere, the economy, the society. Second, closing down hybrid Eldorado in Europe. That means reducing the space for hybrid actors to act within our societies, for example, to infiltrate us by weaponized migration, just as an example. And third, improving our capability of anticipation. So making ourselves better in anticipating unorthodox hybrid attack vectors and also better understanding our own vulnerabilities in the society, critical infrastructure, and also on the military domain.
We have time for one closing question, and I would throw the question of the show to you just to close, starting with you, Wilhelmine. Is Europe ready for a hybrid warfare?
I think it needs really a change of mindset to be ready for this kind of war that we're seeing right now. And I think there's still a way to go.
Jannik?
We need to increase the cost, we need to signal it publicly, and we need to apply it consistently. Only this will force Moscow to calibrate.
Johann?
We need a comprehensive understanding about hybrid warfare in order to bring all relevant actors on board in building resilience and defending ourselves against these kind of threats and actively countering when it makes sense.
It seems like there's a long way to go. Thank you, all three of you, for this discussion. Of course, also thank you for watching. Remember, you can always watch our shows on YouTube. Just search for DW News and the latest To The Point episode. I'm Javier Arguedas. Until next time, take care and goodbye.